Welcome, welcome, welcome. Bienvenidos sean todos. And we are really delighted to have a wonderful guest, somebody who has a lot of experience in some of the most interesting areas in comic book creation, not only in comic books, but he knows how to write. He's also an artist and perhaps one of the most difficult works that there are. He's an awesome editor and he has been behind some of the greatest titles for the last century, and right now he has a very interesting project, and we're talking right now with Mr. Tom Peyer. How are you doing, Tom?
I'm doing great, thank you. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. No, we are really delighted for having you in here. And well, let me introduce the rest of the gang. I am going in the alphabetical order, so we have in here El Wookie.
Hi.
All right. After him, we have Zico, alias Ricardo. How are you doing?
Very fine. Nice to meet you all. Alphabetical order, okay. If you say so.
Well, it's the right alphabet in a different country. And there we have Richard Grayson, Nightboy.
Hi, good night, everybody. Welcome back.
All right, so we are ready for this episode of the stream. This is the series where we are talking with different authors, different creators, and I'm really delighted to be talking right now with Tom because in our last during the last 3 months, I believe we have been recommending a lot of titles of one of I dare to say my favorite comic book company right now, Ahoy Comics, because guys, you are doing really amazing stuff. I remember that the first title that came to mind, it was The Wrong Air, but it was not only that. We have been talking about different titles. Actually, we had the chance to be talking with Mark Russell because he also wrote a short story for Edgar Allan Poe's Sniffer of Terror. And that's not the only title that we have in there. Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit about Ahoy Comics and where did you get the idea to have, well, right now there are only 4 titles, but you are touching a lot of different elements. We have horror, we have adventure. So where did the idea come to pick this kind of stories?
Well, we wanted to do something, we wanted to do books that were really good looking and really smart, but were in some way funny. There's an awful, we just felt like everyone could use a laugh in 2018, 2019, with so much going on. But I think that really distinguishes us from a lot of the companies. Is in some way they don't have to be comedies, but they have to be funny or absurd in some way, because it's our way of saying that we want to entertain you. And I always felt like so many comics kind of want to entertain you, but they also want to accomplish other things too, like crossovers or events or something. And sometimes that really gets in the way of entertainment, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But so we just want you to just enjoy yourself, and that's it.
All right, and well, we are actually looking at the page, at the home page. I remember that you can get most of these comics. You have different options. You can get them in Comixology. You can have it in both digital stores on physical form. And well, we are going to be talking about some of your career also. Let's go a little bit to the past so we can understand a little bit more how we can get to this moment. And Nightboy, do you have some questions about Tom's career?
Yeah, we were talking about just a little before the show started that something that really came to my attention was that Tom began as a political cartoonist before getting into comic books and all that. And you were telling me you didn't finish the story, but why political cartoonist? Why all that stuff that has a little but nothing else to do with all you have been doing the last 30 years, more or less?
Right. Yeah, that's true. It's true. My career took a turn, didn't it? But yeah, starting in my 20s, I did this comic strip for our alternative weekly paper in Syracuse, New York, the Syracuse New Times, which is still around. And it started out as local political humor, and it was in the age of Ronald Reagan, so it quickly became a lot of Ronald Reagan jokes. But Syracuse New I did it for about 12 years, and once I got the opportunity at DC Comics, it actually helped lead to it, actually, in roundabout ways. Age of Ronald Reagan. So I was hired to be in 1990. I was hired to be an assistant editor at DC Comics by Karen Berger, and then I didn't have time to do my comic strip anymore, and I wasn't in Syracuse anymore, so it went away. But I always loved all kinds of comics: political comics, newspaper comics, comic book comics. If they invented new kinds of comics, I would love those. From the time I was very, very young, I wanted to be around them and be part of them and just have them in my life.
So that you became immediately an assistant editor under Karen Berger's tutelage, so to speak, and that's when you started the Vertigo seal for DC Comics.
Yeah, Karen. I'd been there already for a year or two when Karen started to launch Vertigo, and Stuart Moore, who is with me at Ahoy Comics, and writes one of our titles and edits that title. He and I worked for Karen when that was happening, and he stayed a lot longer than I did. Stuart edited some amazing books like Preacher and Transmetropolitan, and he's written a lot since then, and he's just great.
Well, your career on Vertigo is not a lightweight one because you were on the annual #1 of Animal Man. You were on Black Orchid, on Constantine, the Hellblazer collection. You were on Doom Patrol, Hellblazer, the Sandman. Those are not the heavyweight writers that you were editing at the time.
Well, Sandman and Hellblazer, I was an assistant editor, which means I did a lot of work, but the books probably would have come out exactly the same way if I'd never been born. But when I became editor on Doom Patrol, I worked really well with Richard Case and Grant Morrison and Simon Bisley on that. We all got along really well, and we're kind of rowing in the same direction. Same with we had Dick Foreman and Jill Thompson on Black Orchid, and Ann Nesenti and Sean Phillips on Kid Eternity. Those were great teams.
Yeah. And which one of them was more easy to work with, or the more feedback that they were? Because we were talking about Grant Morrison and Neil Gaiman. Those
right.
Are that I haven't read anything that I can say, oh, this is a bad issue from any of both. How hard, how easy was to work with writers like them, and how they shape the way you started to write comics?
It was easy to work with them because they really knew what they were doing. And also, I want to mention Jamie Delano, who was doing Hellblazer when I got there, and Peter Milligan, who was doing Shade the Changing Man, which started right after I got there. And working with those writers was a great education. And they were so secure in what they were doing. They were so collaborative. You could say to them, hey, what if we did it this other way? And they would really listen to you. And I found it was the writers who maybe didn't write as well, who would stick up for every word that they wrote, fight for every word. But the guys who really wrote well, and the women who really wrote well, always seem to be open to collaboration in a way that I hope I've been.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I find interesting, and that I believe that have helped in this case, the launch of Ahoy Comics, coming back to the present right now, it's part of the links that you established right there. In one of the titles that we were seeing before, that we have been recommending, it's in Edgar Allan Poe's Sniffer of Terror. For us, it was kind of funny, and I would like El Wookie to ask some questions about it, because, well, we have some stories from Mark Russell, obviously from you, from Tom Peyer, and you are of the few editors-in-chiefs that can actually brag and say that, who is writing for me? Edgar Allan Poe. Well, sort of, because you are also adapting some of his stories in here. So, Wookie, do you have some questions about this title and the horror line that it's been in playing here?
Yeah, I want to know why Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, yeah, he's very famous, but how came the idea?
Well, to be honest, it's Edgar Allan Poe because everyone recognizes him. He's a famous name, and we don't have to pay him, and he does not, and he doesn't get to say, he doesn't get a say in what we're going to do. And his writing had a great sense of humor, but you almost wouldn't know it because it can be so dense and thick with very, very long sentences. There's a lot about him you can make fun of, including this reputation he had that is probably false for being like this completely wasted uh, character, you know. So
All right.
just a lot there. There was a lot there to make fun of, and a lot there that was brilliant to work with, and then in approaching creators too. Everybody knows his work, and everybody kind of wants to put a hand in it. So that's been really nice.
All right, Wookie, another question?
Yeah, he works. Well, you work with Bongo Comics from Simpson. The Simpsons also work with Edgar Allan Poe. Do you have any idea from there, or was just a coincidence?
I wasn't thinking about it, but it might have influenced me unconsciously. But I wasn't thinking consciously about it. I loved working with Bongo. I did some Bart Simpson stories, and the editor was Bill Morrison, who's brilliant, and he's now running Mad Magazine. So for the last, I guess they haven't had that many issues out yet, but I think he's really going to put his stamp on it. That's really good.
All right, and Wookie, another question, and we go with Ricardo.
Ricardo.
Okay, Zico, Rick, I believe that you had the chance to check some of the titles. I don't remember if High Heaven or perhaps the Wrong Earth. Do you have any question particular about the Wrong Earth or this other title?
There is something that came to me. Why Ahoy Comics? Why the name Ahoy?
Oh, why the name Ahoy? There's a real okay. The guys I started it with, they're in Syracuse. Hart Seeley is our publisher, former journalist. Another former political cartoonist, Frank Camuso, who now does these great graphic novels for children. The new one's called Edison Beaker. And you can tell I've done a lot of these because I can really throw the plugs in there. You know? but the reason we call it Ahoy has something to do with our long friendship. And we're asking readers to guess what it is. So I'm afraid I'm not going to tell you now, but I will say that a reader has guessed that the O stands for of, OF. So we'll probably be revealing this soon, but it's and I'll certainly tell you after we're off.
Okay, so remember, guys, stay tuned. You won't be seeing this because we'll be a private conversation, but you will see the face of accomplishment that we will have because an ancient mystery will be revealed before our eyes. All right. So exactly. Do you have another question, Rick, before we pass to some of the other characters?
How the idea of the Wrong Earth come to you?
I just I've been reading comic books for a long time, and it's easy to notice that right around the middle 1980s, the heroes got really different. And before then, they were all like sort of upstanding. They loved authority. They weren't really, I would say they would use minimal force to get the job done. And then after that, it was like, they're just these stick it to the man, alienated guys who want to just set you on fire and throw you off a rooftop, you know. And they're just alienated and vicious. So, I mean, it's not. People talk about certain superheroes like that, but it's all like that. I mean, there are a million examples of the square pre-1986 superheroes and the vicious post-1986 superheroes. So I've always thought it's funny that what a hero's chest emblem means to you depends on how old you are or how young you are. Like to me, a Superman S, for instance, probably meant, when I was young, it meant nonviolence and service to humanity and honesty. And we all know how dishonesty was, but you know what I mean. But and fair play and stuff. And then, but now he's kind of on a revenge kick because there's a villain who blew up Krypton, and Superman's not the best example, I know, but um, let's use the Bat. You know, the Bat was like completely upstanding, Adam West kind of guy, and now the Bat is it means that he's just on this vengeance mission because his parents are dead, and 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 who cares about the law? You know, not that I care so much about the law, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah.
But it meant to me, it's funny, you have this same corporate logo going for 80 years on the same character, but what that character means is entirely dependent on what decade you're in. And so I find that fascinating. So I wanted to play with that. I just wanted to show both ends of it. I originally, when I first got the idea, it was years ago, and I was going to call it, I thought Archie Comics owned this hero, the Fly, and I was going to call it Fly versus Fly. And then I found out that they didn't own him anymore, so I just put it in the drawer. And I was so glad Ahoy happened, and Jamal Igle came into the picture, and he became a real co-creator. He designed those worlds so brilliantly, and it just happened the right way, I think.
And for example, that's really interesting because we are confronting, as you mentioned, different versions of the same character. And you can see also how the comic book industry or the storytelling that exists within has kind of evolved or perhaps going backwards in some cases. But also, you recover the sense of wonder because this is from the last issue, which is actually available right now. So go on. If you are watching this live, please go to Comixology or to, well, at this time it should be Comixology. Buy it and then come back to check the rest of the interview. But you are helping us to recover the sense of wonder. Some of the things that perhaps were during the Silver Age or even the Golden Age were right now could seem ridiculous, like the giant typewriter machine or something like that. You recover, but and you also adapt it so we can face it with a different sensibility. The sensibility of the original character, the sensibility of the character from a different Earth, either if it's Alpha or Omega, and also the sensibility of the reader, because after all, if we are older, well, you can say, I am remembering this from as a reference, but if you are just a kid who just bought a first issue of Ahoy Comics because the name sounded fun, and you are just facing these kind of stories for the first time, you can be just with your eyes wide open because you are seeing something coming from the fantasy. So for that, first of all, I am really thankful. And after that, where do you plan to take these characters? Do you want to expand perhaps with the different versions in both universe, or is it just a story that it's self-contained in the case of the Wrong Earth?
This story ends with number 6, but there's going to be a second story. Excellent. And it'll come out. Well, Jamal has to go off and draw another comic book that he's committed to, and then when he's done with that, he'll come back and get started on the next season of The Wrong Earth, which will be, now that we've established, everybody knows, the two universes are different and the two heroes are different, we'll start to mix it up a little more, and they might even meet each other.
Excellent. And Nightbot, do you have more questions?
I have like 1,000 questions.
Go ahead, please.
Well, there's something that's very, I don't know, curious for just to describe it. Is that reading The Wrong Earth or Captain Ginger, that your stories is like you told us, that you are on to entertain, that the comics that you are writing right now are to entertain people, are to light-hearted stories. Going a little backwards, when you were an editor on DC Comics, It's like I told you before the show that I'm a big fan of the Legion of Superior and your work on it. There's a period, like you said, when all the heroes became so greedy, so out of for vengeance or for blood, just for the sake of it. That was the 5 years later, the story that Kid Giffen wrote with the beer bombs. Then, right after that came the Zero Hour, and you came to the title, to the Legion of Superiors title, and wrote it. And it's like day and night the difference between what you were doing in that book and the take that the Beerbombs and I think not the Beerbombs because they're trying to get a little lighter. That what Giffen was writing in the beginning of that volume. Is that something that you think that's your particular characteristic as a writer, to make stories that it doesn't matter if you are 80 years old or 6-year-old, that you can relate that something that inspires you to be a good person or to be the best version of yourself that you can be no matter what?
I think it's more with me personally and with a few other guys I worked with in the 90s at DC, Mark Waid and Grant Morrison, and a bunch of us were all into sort of reversing the grim and gritty 80s and putting, like, Grant had JLA and stuff. And with me, it's more imagination. I like comics to be, and I was raised on comics that were really imaginative. And part of that was the comics code was so strict. You couldn't have like graphic sex or violence. So they had to come up with visual gags that they wouldn't have thought of otherwise, like the Flash with a huge head, and they were under constant pressure to come up with these things. And I love that stuff. I love the pressure to imagine. I love a comic book showing you something you'd never see anywhere else. And I think that animates me more. And I have to say, in sort of the Wrong Earth conflict, I hope it doesn't look like I'm taking sides, because I like both of those characters. And I do tend to be turned off by characters who just use guns or knives, because you don't need to go to a comic book for someone who's using a gun or a knife. They're everywhere, those people, in the real world.
Okay, and all the things that you've been doing, just for example, Captain Ginger, that's a tiger. It has something to do with the, I don't know, this. I'm not saying that it's a copy or something like that, but loosely based on Talking Tony, the character from Captain Marvel, Shazam. That kind of fantasy, that kind of stories that let the reader, let their imagination, I don't know, just fly and just, I don't know, to get the anxiety of where are you taking them with this kind of characters?
Yeah. If Stuart were here, he would probably quickly say that he wasn't thinking about Tawny. But there have been other humanoid cats, I guess. But Stuart wanted to do a book about cats with June Brigman, because she draws them amazingly and she loves cats. But yeah, all the points you make about imagination are absolutely right on. I like that about movies too. I love going and seeing an image that I can never see when I walk outside my house.
All right, and I have another question about another title that perhaps we're leaving at the end, but it's not because it's the less important. For me, it's like one of the most actually most fun, and it doesn't work with the sense of adventure, perhaps like we have in other titles, but it's more like a philosophical reading, perhaps a theological reading. And well, yes, of course, I'm talking about the High Heaven, because one of the great things about the reinterpretation of the characters that we're seeing there, I love the way that you're portraying, in this case, Saint Peter, because he's let's just say that not the nicest person, or not the way that you would be portraying or thinking about a saint at the gates of heaven. But you can also identify, because just imagine that you have been taking care of the door and letting all these souls get in here. And it's really funny. It's looking at the different policies, these policies that he has established, or how he treats people. So this is just to ask: are you a religious people, or this is a completely entire interpretation based, I don't know, well, obviously in your own imagination?
Well, I was raised in a religion, but I don't belong to one now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a religious person now. But I think the heaven we're presenting is very secular. It's more of a cultural heaven. It's the kind of heaven that they might have shown in the movies in the 30s or 40s when, you know, it's people standing on clouds with wings and there's like, I don't know what that, they just took all the religion out of it somehow. But it's kind of in the secular heaven because, and I got advice to do it that way, and it was good advice because it doesn't exclude anything except, but it kind of excludes everything. But you wouldn't like feel good reading it because you don't belong to that particular religion, you know. So which didn't really, and it's to me it's about austerity politics, and it's about people who don't take responsibility for their own lives. And it's about a bunch of different things, including religion, which I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but that's what I said.
Don't worry. It's, actually, I'd rather have a different conversation. And another independent title. This is from a different. Oops, I am promoting a different editorial.
Oh, that's fine.
But for example, I really like comparing Her Infernal Descent. We actually have talked before with Lonnie Nadler and Zach Thompson. And I really like reading first that one and then at the same time High Heaven, because we're having different perspectives in this case of the afterlife. And one of the things that I believe is that it's if you know who to work these characters or this reference, like places like heaven or hell, it's great because pretty much everybody, either if you are religious or not, at least you have a sense of the place or of the people that's in there. So that allows you to work, in this case, as you mentioned, more in the political places, in the ethical and moral places. In this case, with the character and the decisions that he has been made in. And I remember on the issue number 1. Sorry, this will be a small spoiler. I just love how he was confronting his own mortality, because he was like listening to some music, and pretty much everybody around him was warning him that something was coming, and he was, yeah, something is coming, but it's okay. And it was just a piano falling right on his head. Mm-hmm. So it's also a nice way, from my perspective, to confront, in this case, fiction, or the way that we are idealizing reality, when it actually punches you, or you are facing the consequences, in this case, of your life.
Thank you. I'm really glad you liked that comic and read it so carefully and got so much out of it. I love that. Thank you. It seems like you guys have all read all this stuff, and I really appreciate that.
We're perhaps just missing the Tony the Tiger, no, the Captain Gringer, but that's because we are afraid that the Wookiee might eat him. No, that's a different thing. No, sorry. Okay, so
I guess that's easy to read all the comics that you write, because all the things that you write are so easy to read. So there has certain flaws. There's no need to go back 2-3 numbers to get back into the story every time the new issue comes. So I guess it's that the fact that we have read all the numbers and all the issues, because you make it so easy for us.
That's a really nice compliment. Thank you. I do try. I've worked with Mark Waid a lot, and he's really smart about comics and wise about things. And he's given me a lot of great advice over the years about keeping the reader informed, you know. And really, we would go over other people's comics together and go, look how awful that is. And have a really great time doing that. You know, here's a story with 3 different characters have narrative captions. How are you supposed to keep that straight? You know, we hate stuff like that.
And you're bringing back the captions, right? And the thoughts balloons?
Yeah. We've had a discussion about thought balloons. Yeah, there might be some thought balloons in the future.
You bring back the The globes on the covers of the issues.
The what?
The globes. Do you remember that in the early '80s, the '70s, all the books have conversation in the cover of all the books?
The dialogue balloons.
Yeah.
We haven't done that yet. But I'm proud. The thing we brought back that I'm proudest of is page numbers.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I
So
think
you
they
can make reference the captions, and you can make references. Yeah, go back and read page number 9. So
yeah, it makes the
right?
I don't know how people talk about comic books that don't have page numbers.
True.
Yeah, this is one page of High Heaven, and that's actually really true because perhaps it's because we are so used. If we were reading on digital medium, if you have a Kindle, you only care about the percentage of the book, and in this case, well, if you read carefully, page number 3 in this case, like pages. You mean that these things have pages? But well, that's really good.
Dinosaurs.
Alright.
That's a nice Greg Scott piece of art with Andy Troy coloring. Those guys are amazing together.
Yeah, they are outstanding. So we're going to go to a final round on questions just right before we go. And Siko, I believe that you had a question prepared, right?
Yes. A part of recommend the wrong earth, those 4 issues are outstanding. I can compare it with OSMs that bring us Kurt Busiek with Astro City, or I love the kind of stuff you are writing. And now there are 4 titles, no, in Ahoy.
There are right now, yeah. And
Yeah.
there's seasons, and when they end, there'll be more titles, different ones. But yes,
Okay. And that was the part of the question. It would be more projects soon, or it
Yeah.
will be seasons like you are telling us.
All the comics we're doing now will end with issue 4, 5, or 6 for now. The first season will end, and then we'll roll out 3 or 4 new comics after that, which I can't tell you about yet because we have to announce them. I really wish I could, but there's some really good creators and really good ideas. I hope. I hope you'll agree, and so there'll be something. I can't even say that. I'm not saying a thing about this. But
All right.
thanks for wanting to know. It won't be long. It won't be long before it's announced. Just a matter of weeks. So.
Okay, you really pick up our interest.
Good.
All right. So, Wookie, do you have a final question?
Yeah, you're working now with Edgar Allan Poe. In the future, will you work with Robert Bloch, Lovecraft, someone like that?
I've been thinking about it, and Poe is the only one I know that we can do funny covers with because everybody knows what he looks like. So, and also he's in public domain. I don't believe Robert Bloch is, or I guess Lovecraft is. I don't even know if he's in public domain. But I think we might come back and do more Poe someday because these covers by Richard Williams, who used to do covers for Mad, he does the High Heaven cover paintings and he does the Poe cover paintings. And I don't know if you saw number 2, but it's funny. It's like the Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, and Poe is in his underwear, standing over the elevated highway. And we have more like that coming up. And just to do these covers, I would like to stay with Poe for a while because it's so fun to humiliate him.
Yeah.
Got it.
Well, I wouldn't say that it's you are not exactly. You're not making fun of him. You're having fun with him. But well, that's a different thing.
Thank you. Good. I'll tell that to the next angry Poe reader.
All right. Oh, and one small comment about that, because actually, yes, in issue number 2 of where we're looking at the cover right there, I love that you included some of the mentions, like if Edgar Allan Poe was reading, like in a forum, different comments of modern readers, but with the old sensibility. So it was like, how would it have been if they had these means of communication? And it was just wonderful. So I just wanted to say that.
Rachel Pollack. the Victorian internet.
Exactly.
Putting Rachel Pollack and Rick Geary together, I thought was one of the great things we've done in that story in number 2.
Yeah. And final question, Nightboy?
Yeah, actually, I have two questions. The first one related with all the stories that comes with this year with Ahoy Comics with your editorial. Are you planning to bring more writers? Because I saw that you somewhere between the credits on the Wrong Earth, Grant Morrison is involved in some part of the story. Are you planning to bring more writers to collaborate with other titles that are not, I don't know, The Wrong Earth, Captain Ginger, the other two comics that you're publishing? Or are you planning just on keeping it tight with the creative group that you are working right now?
Well, first of all, I'm really glad you mentioned Grant, because I have neglected to mention this whole time that Ahoy Comics have backup comic stories, and then we have prose stories in the back, and poems and nonfiction, and we're trying to make it into a complete reading experience, like a whole magazine for you. But as far as bringing other writers in, yes, other writers will be writing Ahoy comic books.
And you're including cooking recipes? I saw that Rosales wrote a fried chicken microwave recipe.
That's right, we do. We have drinks recipes coming up. And
Okay.
we have all kinds of great stuff.
Okay. And the second one, it's a little bit more technical. How well are going the sales with Ahoy Comics?
Well, I'm not allowed to tell you any numbers, but
I don't care about numbers. Just how well, for being a new editorial company, how well is it the public reacting the way you expected it to react?
They're reacting the way better than we hoped. We've issue 5 of The Wrong Earth sold more copies than issue 1, which I am told never ever happens. So we're building every month, and that's very exciting for us, and it's opening up opportunities we didn't know we were going to have with certain characters. So that's you'll be seeing more of these characters in ways that you might not expect.
Oh, that's right, because they are great characters.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
And with that, I believe that we are pretty much about to finish this transmission. First of all, Tom, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your experience, your knowledge, because it was really delightful to share some comments with you. And thanks for the wonderful world that you are creating in Ahoy Comics in this case.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you guys.
All right, and also thank you to all our patrons, because without you guys we wouldn't be making the effort to, first of all, to get to the 500 episodes, because we're getting really close, and of course to you we're offering this great chance to have a conversation with great authors, with the great talent that it's bringing us these stories in comic books, in writing and storytelling in general. And because we also don't like to just be talking between ourselves and commenting comics, we rather be talking with people who create, because after all, they deserve all the credit. And once again, thank you very much, Tom. And before I forget it, if people want to check a little bit more about the different publications and the different titles that are being out there on the wild, you can check it in different social networks. You can go and check in Twitter in Ahoy Comics Max. It's short for it is the short version of Ahoy Comics Magazine. They are publishing right now, for example, the latest releases. I believe that is the easiest way to find it about the new titles, if I am correct, Tom.
The nipple one is Jimmy Palette's contribution.
Exactly, we have it in there. And also, if you want to check more about this, obviously you can go to comicsahoy.com. That's Comics Ahoy. You can also find it in Facebook, in Twitter, as we mentioned, and Instagram. And please follow them, and not only follow them, but buy the comics, because believe us, guys, they are doing a wonderful work. All right.
Thank you.
And that's pretty much all for us. And remember, the video version is right now available both in YouTube and also on Facebook. And also tomorrow we are going to be publishing the audio-only version in case that you just want to listen it as a podcast. It will be also available. And that's pretty much everything from our part. Once again, thank you, Zico, Nightboy, Woki, and especially Tom. And thanks to all of you who are watching this transmission. And we will be seeing us in the next show, next week, actually. Bye.